Drop the camera. It's all good. Good morning, vlog. Today is Sunday, October 7th. I've been back in New York City for a couple of days. Took a few days off, tried to recharge a little bit, had to shoot some content for New York City Comic-Con yesterday, and today I want to try something a little bit different. So I did an Instagram Q&A yesterday, and I got a ton of questions of people asking me to do a tutorial on how I edit my photos, and that's something I've never done before, so I'm going to try and do it today. I'm going to do my first tutorial video. How I take my self-portraits that you probably see on Instagram, how I edit them, and how I make sure they're exported and ready for the highest quality to go up on the gram. But first, I have to take care of one issue I'm having with this camera, so I have to go to the best place in all of New York City.
3, 2, 1.
So I live about a block away from B&H, which is amazing for days like this. It's also terrible for my bank account. But I broke my mic the other day when I was leaving Vancouver, so I had to get a replacement. That's why the audio sounds so bad right now. So while I'm getting this set up, I figured I'd give a little breakdown of my plan for the day. Also, welcome to my room. I think there's a fundamental difference between taking pictures and making pictures. Someone who takes pictures is, in my mind, a documentary photographer, right? You could argue that in my day-to-day life, I am a documenter. I film other people's lives, of them doing their thing. But when it comes to my personal work, I want everything to be a little bit more planned out. Okay, let's hope that audio sounds insanely better. I was thinking of, when it comes to me teaching something, what's something unique to myself that I can teach that thousands of other YouTubers and people who make tutorials haven't sort of dug into. I was thinking what's like special to me. So ever since I was 19 or 20, I've been doing this sort of ongoing series where I put myself in a picture and then I have floating objects all over me. I was like, I want to teach people how to make that, and then a lot of people have been asking how I'm doing my color correction recently, or my color grading, I should say. So I figured those two things are an interesting concept. But to go one step further, I want to show you guys how I actually take my pictures. A large majority of the time, I'm photographing myself. These little guys on my 1DX, this plugs into the top. I hold this in my hand and it allows me to remotely trigger the camera. So that way I can set up the camera, I can get the framing right, I can put myself in frame, and I don't have to keep running back and forth to click the self timer every 2 seconds. My idea is to have a picture of myself taking, kind of like going up to take a picture with this camera, and then I'm in a world where there's tons of these cameras floating all around me. Now that I have my concept in mind, I know what type of picture I want to make today, I have to go find the right location. Alright, so here's what I'm doing, and this is generally how I book locations in New York. I'm using a service called Breather. Basically, all of these locations are available in mainly Manhattan and Brooklyn. I find a location that I like, so I'm gonna book a room right now. The only issue is it's only available for the next hour and a half, and then it closes for the day. So I'm gonna reserve it right now. Luckily, it is only a couple blocks from my apartment. So I think all the details really matter when trying to make a picture versus taking a picture. So even whenever I get locations and things like this, the next part is actually styling the look the way I want it. Now, I'm not really a fashion person, but I'm getting better. So I try to think of a look that would work with the concept. So I'm thinking something a little bit more streety, kind of urban, but also class it up a little bit.
And then that next in the bud too, that like terrible writing sort of that.
So we're in the space. Time to explore, figure out the framing. This is New York, so it's all super small and condensed. So I'm probably gonna have to rearrange some furniture, figure out the look I wanna go for, and then see how I'm doing on time. So it is 12:50 currently. I have to be out of this space in an hour and 10 minutes. We have a lot to do. So I think what I'm gonna do is I moved all the furniture out and I'm gonna shoot the image going into this corner. It's gonna allow me to do something kind of cool where I'm gonna let a whole bunch of light come through the windows. It's gonna have a very like bright and airy sort of look. So the next phase, once I've sort of picked out the location, which is gonna be this corner, I have to figure out how to get the camera in place so that I can get the frame I want. I don't have a tripod with me today other than the little Joby tripod since I was in a rush. So I think I'm gonna have to mount it on the couch cushion to probably get the level I want. So this is what the frame currently looks like. This sort of base exposure is okay, but it's kind of impossible for me to know what the frame's actually gonna look like until I'm in it. So I'm gonna switch into the outfit I brought for the shot, put myself in here, add the triggers to the camera, and start taking some sample shots of myself in the frame. But I'm in the outfit that I want to be wearing in the shot is to hook up the wireless triggers. So this is what I'm currently looking at. I'm in the picture, 1DX is there, I have the remote, and I can take the first test shot, run over here and see how it looks. Honestly, we're not too far off. I'm gonna set the camera up and take a few other shots to really kind of dial in the settings and everything that I want for this. So now I'm actually gonna take the camera, the prop, and get the hero shot. So this is me, I'm gonna take all the pictures of myself at this point, of different poses to find the one that I like. The important thing to remember here, again, is that I'm not gonna change any camera settings or anything at that point. The only thing that's gonna remain automatic on the camera is the focus, and that's so I can get the shot of myself. A big key here is once I think I have the shot, before I take another one, I'm gonna lock the focus where it is. So the focus should be on where I was standing in the frame. I hope that makes sense. Guys, so at this point, I just looked through those pictures. I'm pretty sure one of those would work as my hero shot. So the first section of this project is done. We have the photo of me and the location. The next part is getting the floating elements that are going to be composited into the hero shot of myself. So the one big thing, and this is super, super important, all the camera settings should stay the same, but I'm now going to turn autofocus off. So whenever I re-trigger the camera is not going to focus again for me. It's going to be locked onto the last point it was focused on, which was the picture of me in the frame. The important thing for that is that the depth of field will change with the floating cameras, and I want to make sure that it looks as authentic as it possibly can and it doesn't look like it's a composite. So the next phase is switching the camera to manual focus, and now I'm going to use the trigger again to throw the camera into the air, and I'm going to collect hundreds of frames of the camera floating with none of the settings being changed on the camera. With 20 minutes to spare, I think I have enough coverage to put together the composite the way I want to. So I'll give you guys a quick preview on what this looks like on the back of the camera. And tons of frames of me throwing the camera up into the air. Now it doesn't matter that I'm in the frame because all that's gonna get taken care of. But I got hundreds of different angles. Some of them are closer to the camera, some of them are further away. They're all at different levels. And all of these can be composited in. I can take all these little frames of the camera in the air, and then we're gonna match them on top of one of these hero shots. So I think it's probably going to be maybe this one. That one's pretty good too. One of these will work. All right, so we're done shooting for now. We created all of the assets we need. I put the room back together so I won't get in trouble. And then we're gonna pack up. I'm gonna go to the office now, and we're gonna break down step by step how to actually build this composite, make sure it's formatted, it looks great, and everything's ready to go to upload it to the gram. We're back in the office, and now it's time to break down the meat of this photo, which all takes place in the laptop. I'm going to assume everyone has a fairly advanced level of knowledge when it comes to photo and video, so I'm gonna skip over a lot of things, but I will at some point do some more videos on more kind of intro basic stuff on file structure, things like that. But for now, I'm gonna ingest all of the footage and photos from today into its own folder inside of a Vlogtober folder I have on this Lacy drive. This isn't an ad, but this Dirty Lemon stuff is unbelievable. It's like $15 a bottle, but I'm into it. Step one, I've now imported all of my photos into Lightroom. Lightroom's gonna help us with the selection process, moving everything out of Lightroom into Photoshop. Basically, the first thing I'm gonna do is work backwards. Since I know that the frame using myself is the first thing I need to figure out, I'm gonna scroll down to right before I started doing the shots without the camera. All right, so going into Lightroom, I'll make this selection, and we're gonna start backwards. So I'm just gonna click basically through all the image I shot, and the 1DX bursts in 3 frames, which is why there's so many extra shots. And then I'm just gonna start clicking P on any images that I think might be kind of the winning shot. This sort of looks interesting. I'm looking for something that has like good expression and helps what I think sort of best tell the story. There's a couple frames in there that will work. So to give a quick breakdown on like the theory behind this, we kept the camera in the same place throughout all of the photos being taken. So I can select the main hero shot, the background plate, and then all the shots of the camera floating in space, layer those all on top of each other in one Photoshop composition, mask out, basically erase all the picture except for the camera floating, and because we kept all the settings the same, it should just look like this was taken completely in camera and that all the cameras that are in the picture are exactly as is. We've now gone through all of the selections, both the images with myself in them and then all of the images of me throwing the extra camera up into the air. In this case, what we're coming away with is 5 selections. I'll show you what those are. We have this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. And then on top of that, we have about 65 images of me throwing the camera into the air. Now, we're not gonna need all 65 images, and I highly encourage you don't shoot this much. A lot of this is blamed both on me wanting just to have limitless options, as well as the burst rate of the 1DX tends to create a lot of images. We're gonna break this down into 3 sections to make it most digestible, right? We're coming out of Lightroom, which is where I make my first color adjustment. Now, I'm sure a lot of people will argue the way I do coloring is probably super inefficient. You're not wrong, but it's just my workflow and it's how I kind of do things. So I make an initial color adjustment coming out of Lightroom. That's step 1. I'm taking all of my selects into Photoshop to do the actual build, which is where I'm gonna clean up the image as well as composite all of the cameras in. That's step 2. And then step 3 is a final color adjustment to really get the bright, contrasty look that has been showing up on my Instagram lately. So there's 2 files you're gonna need for this. The first one is a Lightroom preset, which I've included in a link down below. The second is also a LUT file provided by my good friend Paul Neff, who has a really, really great LUT pack and has been nice enough to allow me to include the LUT I use available for free, which is also going to be in the download link. Here we are, we're in Lightroom, we have our selects. I'm gonna click on Babin_1 tutorial, which is the first color adjustment that we're gonna make. And this coloring should, for the most part, work across the board on a lot of images. I'm just gonna bring the exposure down the tiniest bit from 55 to 60 in this particular image. Now I'm going to go all the way down to the end, select all of these files, and then click this button right here called Sync. And that's going to apply all of the effects that are on that first image across to all the other images, so everything looks consistent. So now you'll see if we click onto any of these other images, they will all have a very similar coloring to the original file. I'm going to take the first 5 images into Photoshop. So I'll select all of them, I'll right click, edit in Photoshop. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make a final selection on the hero shot. So I'm gonna look at these images again. I really like this one, I like this one. This one's pretty good. Man, I like a lot of these shots actually. This is my least favorite, so I'm gonna eliminate this one from the running. Let's see, I would say if I'm gonna do one looking through the camera, it'll be this. So we have image 1, image 2, image 3. I seem to always be looking down in picture, so I don't want to do another looking down picture. Looking off to the side's kind of interesting, as well as this one here. So what I'm actually going to do is bring both of these images in to potentially be final hero shots, and then I'll deal with the rest a little bit later. So the next phase, I'm going to start bringing in images of the cameras, and these are the ones where the camera is being tossed in the air. Layer them in and start doing very, very rough masks to get cameras on their own layer. So I'm just gonna grab the first 10 images right here. We'll select edit in Photoshop. I just don't want to take too many images at a time into Photoshop so that I can keep my layers organized and all that, because this does get to be a bit confusing once you really start getting all these layers in. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Alright, so here we are. All of the images with the cameras have now loaded in, and I'm going to start dropping all of these files on top of the hero images. So if you do Command A, Command C, that copies it, come over to this one, Command V, which will drop a new layer of the file in here. Once I have that, I'm okay with just closing this out. Don't need to save it. I'm gonna go through all the images, bringing them in 10 at a time, and dropping them onto main composition until I have all of the files I need in one document. At this point, we brought in all of our pictures into Lightroom, and then one by one, I brought in all of these images of the camera floating on its own and placed them above the images of myself. So just to organize the files a little bit more, what we're going to do is select all of these images of the camera floating. I'll put these into their own folder called camera. The photos of me go into a folder called hero. So now is kind of the fun part, is we really get to start building this out and honestly see if the concept works. So we're going to start going through each of the camera files, selecting the camera, and then masking out everything but the camera. So here's how that looks. So I'm going to select the lasso tool, and on every file, I'm going to draw a circle around the camera, and then click this mask button down here on your layer panel, just like that. Once I do that, I'll turn the layer off and go to the next layer. Now, because I shot so many images, you can see we're in a situation now where these two cameras basically layer right on top of each other. I'm still gonna go ahead and mask this out because maybe there will be some gaps and put them in where there might be some extra space. So we're gonna go through this whole thing. This takes a little bit of a process. It can be extremely rough. You don't have to be precise with these selections. I make a very sort of loose judgment on where the lasso is going, because we're gonna go in and really start refining this later. But you can see even these couple first images are really exciting. We're really starting to see how it's all going to come together. Okay guys, so we went through, dropped in all of the images of the cameras on their own. We circled them and masked them out. So here's the big reveal to see where we landed. And not exactly what I was expecting, right? So I can tell that when I was throwing the cameras, obviously they were way too condensed into one area. We didn't really get any out on the sides, but that's okay. This image is not a bust. It's actually going to be really, really cool. So at this point, I think it's obvious there's way too many cameras in the frame. So what we're gonna do is start selecting which cameras make sense to be where. Now, just because a camera isn't placed in correctly, we can always move it to another section. So right now, I'm just kind of looking at the image. I'm studying it to see the direction it needs to go, because there's gonna be a lot of masking and things like that. Sorry, I didn't pick a easier tutorial on getting one right out of the gate, but I think this is pretty cool. It shows really like the learning process of how these images come together. Now that I've taken a break and I'm looking back at the image, I think this is the hero shot I'm gonna go with. So I'm actually gonna get rid of this shot and just focus on this one. I'm gonna duplicate it by clicking Control-J, and then I'm going to use this as my cleanup layer. So we'll call this cleanup. And now I'm gonna use my stamp selection tool as well as my patch tool to clean up a handful of things on the image. We're gonna zoom in really close, and I'm gonna pick out a handful of things that I'm sort of seeing, and I'll create a new layer and you guys can really see sort of my thought process on what needs to come out of this image. So I want to get rid of this piping up here. I want to figure out something to do with the AC unit. That doesn't look great. We need to eliminate the remote control that I used here. There's some pieces of tape on the image, as well as this patch of a miscolored tape. I'll probably go ahead and take out these windows, so this is just all white coming through. I'll clean up this back wall a little bit and take out this pipe right here. Basically, my mindset is anything that is not necessary to the image should probably come out of the image. So I'll select my stamp selection tool, and we're just gonna start taking out all these little details. We'll go pretty small, and I tend to leave my flow usually around 30% or so. That should be good to make sure you're not discoloring anything too much. At this point, you can see we cleaned up a lot of layers. I'm gonna select the cleanup layer as well as a couple curve adjustment layers that I used to help blur some things. We'll call this edit, and now you can see what once is now, we brightened up the image a little bit in some certain places, took out some elements. This will still probably, like, I'll refine it a little bit. I decided to leave the AC unit in there because I'm gonna stylize that a little bit whenever we get into the coloring, the final coloring section. Turn off this drawing, take off the layers. It's time to start addressing the kind of meat of the matter with this effect, and that is all of these cameras. It's easy for this section to get overwhelming. It seems like there's a lot going on because a lot of the cameras are overlapping, and I didn't do a great job of whenever I was capturing all these elements to make sure I got a really wide spread. So basically what I'm gonna do at this point is start going layer by layer and selecting out the images that I wanna use. So we can start taking out some unneeded images. And if I feel like an image is unnecessary, I'm just gonna turn it off for now. I'm gonna turn it off because we may still need that at a later date. I'm gonna start repositioning a handful of the cameras, and at this point I'll start repositioning some of the cameras. So for instance, this could go down here, go down to this image. This kind of works. This one's interesting, but we might be getting a little bit too busy in this section, so I'm gonna eliminate this guy. This one seems unnecessary, but this might actually work if we drop it down into a different section of the frame. This will be good. We can bring it up here. So right now, all I'm doing is subtly moving all of the cameras to figure out what works best and to try and get the most realistic effect. So I'm gonna skip through this section really quick, sort of placing the images, going through and making selections of which images should stay, which images should go, and then we'll reconnect once we start the next chapter. All right, guys, It's been a minute. This image really took some time to finesse all the angles. I maybe sort of tried to go a little bit more extreme than how I've done this technique in the past, so I will say that if you're struggling, shooting this image against a more of a flat wall with not a lot of extra elements will really help sort of sell the idea of this being realistic. So this image isn't quite as like seamless as what I would love it, but I think it gets the point across. So we started with 40 something layers of extra images. I went through, I picked some cameras, I got rid of some cameras, and ultimately this layout is what I think looks the best. So now is the kind of finessing part. So you'll see, if you see the cursor, you know, a camera like this, even this one, some of these have a little bit of like bleed where you can see the image from the mask. So what I'm gonna do now is go through each camera and really make sure that it's seamless and looks like it's completely meant to be where it is. So we'll start up here, and this is just taking the brush tool on the mask layer and just painting this out so that all we have is the camera itself and we're not seeing any of the bleed over from the other image. Make sure you go through, touch every object in the frame that you've made float at this point, and just polish it up so that it looks nice and crispy, and each camera is pretty seamless into the composite. Alright guys, so at this point I will say that step 2 of the composite is complete. So we can sort of see a pretty baseline start. We added in a handful of cameras that are going to be floating around me, and now we want to move into the final sort of phase of making the color right where it needs to be. We really want the images to be bright, very contrasty, and this is where the next phase of the next file you guys will be needing comes in handy. So if you open up your adjustments panel, and we're going to select this option here of color lookup. We're going to load a 3D LUT, and you're going to load in your download of the model preset by Paul Neff. We're going to bring this in, and in most cases, this LUT is going to make everything very, very bright, very contrasty, and it's also going to boost your red levels extremely high. All right, so I'm going to set the opacity to 35%. Next thing I'm going to do is make a hue saturation adjustment layer, go to my reds, and I'm going to pull the reds specifically down even further, about another 40%. I want almost the entire image to look black and white other than me in it. Now, everything sort of has to be adjusted individually. These are kind of some master adjustment layers, so you can see that's our beginning, that's where we ended. Everything's pretty desaturated at this point, but I pull the saturation down a little bit further in certain areas. So I'm going to create another hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to bring the master saturation down by 50. Now I'm going to go through and only select this to be in certain areas. So we'll invert the mask by clicking Control I. Get our brush tool. We're still on the mask layer, you can see, and we're going to start painting out certain elements that we want to be a little bit more desaturated. So for instance, I don't want any color to be in the floor really. It should look pretty pure and black and white at this point. I'm going to go through and I can just paint in the section where I want a little bit of a flatter look. So for instance, the floor, generally if I have on any black clothing, I like to make sure that's completely desaturated. So for instance, this jacket, I want to make sure there's no blues left in any of this. So we'll go through, I'm going to paint all of these. I'm going to make one more hue saturation adjustment layer and really knock out the color and a few other options. We'll invert this. I'm going to fully desaturate this AC unit. Since I wasn't able to composite it out, I probably could have if I had a little bit more time, but for now I'll just make sure all the color is out of it. And then I'm also going to hit the wall behind me to make sure all of the sort of blues and all that have completely been sort of washed out, and that the wall behind me is going to look as pure and white as it can. All right, guys. So at this point, I would pretty much call this image done. All I would do is crop it to a square. So there we go. We're set up to a square. I'm gonna go File, Export, and I keep it simple as a simple quick export as PNG. We'll throw this into my Vlogtober 3 tutorial image. And there you go. That's the basic sort of layout of how I create an image. So we gave a rundown on how to shoot an image like this, my sort of coloring workflow. And the important thing to remember here is you can take any aspect of this that you want. So if you're not into making these sort of weird conceptual images, that's okay. You can take just the Lightroom and Photoshop coloring aspects that I showed you of how I make these very like bright images and implement those into anything. Hopefully you guys were able to take something away from this. Let me know in the comments. Is there other stuff you guys want to learn? Was this format, did it make sense? I'm still very much in a learning phase here, so all the criticism you guys can give me is greatly appreciated. Whew. It's been a day. I know what you guys are thinking. Babin, this is your 4th shirt of the day, and I'm gonna be honest, y'all ain't wrong. I sat down to start editing this vlog and realized I just didn't really have anything to close it out with. And so I thought I'd come back up to the roof, like the start of the day, and just say thank you guys. These first couple videos, it put me really out of my comfort zone, and I've just gotten a ton of support, and it means the world to me, and it makes me want to really push through and try and find a good flow with this project. I just want to say thanks. Thanks for all the support. Thanks for letting me give myself permission to do this little project. So I hope you guys have a great week.